Welcome to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast. Your chance to learn about the teachings of the Catholic Church on sacred music, both in theory and practice. Through interviews, discussions, and music, your hearts and minds will be lifted up and better understand what it means to sing the praise of His glory. And now, your hosts, Peter Carter and Dr. Jennifer Donaldson.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast. Happy Easter. It's a beautiful day here in New York, and perhaps you'll be able to hear the birds singing from behind me as I record this. Before we get to today's interview with Dr. Francis Brancaleone, I'd like to share with you a bit from the beginning of Chapter 2 of Dom Prosper Guéranger's volume on Paschaltide from his monumental series, The Liturgical Year. If you've never read from it, I'd strongly encourage it as a source for your spiritual reading, as it's really unparalleled in its ability to lead readers in understanding the mysteries celebrated in the sacred liturgy, through its discussion on the meaning found in the theological, scriptural, liturgical, historical, symbolic, and musical meaning, which marks our lives as Catholics. Dom Guéranger says, "Of all the seasons of the liturgical year, Eastertide is by far the richest in mystery. We might even say that Easter is the summit of the mystery of the sacred liturgy. The Christian who is happy enough to enter with his whole mind and heart into the knowledge and the love of the Paschal mystery has reached the very center of the supernatural life. Hence it is that the Church uses every effort in order to effect this. What she has hitherto done was all intended as a preparation for Easter. The holy longings of Advent, the sweet joys of Christmas, the severe truths of Septuagesima, the contrition and penance of Lent, the heart-rending sight of the Passion, all were given us as preliminaries, as paths to the sublime and glorious Pasch, which is now ours." And just skipping ahead a little bit here, he says, "Eternity in heaven is the true Pasch. Hence our Pasch here on earth is the feast of feasts, the solemnity of solemnities. The human race was dead. It was the victim of that sentence, whereby it was condemned to lie mere dust in the tomb. The gates of light were shut against it. But see, the Son of God rises from his grave and takes possession of eternal life. Nor is he the only one that is to die no more, for, as the apostle teaches us, he is the firstborn from the dead. The Church would, therefore, have us consider ourselves as having already risen with our Jesus, and as already having taken possession of eternal life. The Holy Fathers bid us look on these 50 days of Easter as the image of our eternal happiness. They are days devoted exclusively to joy. Every sort of sadness is forbidden, and the Church cannot speak to her divine spouse without joining to her words that glorious cry of heaven, the Alleluia, wherewith, as the Holy Liturgy says, the streets and squares of the heavenly Jerusalem resound without ceasing. We have been forbidden the use of this joyous word during the past 9 weeks. It behooved us to die with Christ, but now that we have risen together with him from the tomb, and that we are resolved to die no more that death, which kills the soul, and called our Redeemer to die on the cross, we have a right to our Alleluia." If you'd like to learn more about Guéranger, the Benedictine Abbey of Salem's contribution to the restoration of Gregorian chant, or other such monuments of the liturgical movement, I'd point you especially to a course I'll be teaching on Monday and Wednesday evenings this summer, beginning June 3rd and going through July 12th, entitled Sacred Music History Seminar and Practicum, The Liturgical Movement and Sacred Music Renewal 1800 to 1950. We'll dive deeply into Dom Guéranger's writings and other masterworks of both spiritual writings and the treasury of sacred music, all with the goals of helping you grow in your faith and enriching your knowledge and skills for service to the Church through sacred music. To find out more, you can visit our website, sacredmusicpodcast.com, and click on upcoming events. You'll see more about this course listed there, as well as the 7 other classes we're offering this summer. Today's show is also a bit of the history you'll encounter in that class. My interview with Dr. Francis Brancaleone, the former director of the music department at Manhattanville College, and author of a series of articles we're just finishing up publishing with this spring 2021 issue of Sacred Music, about the history of the Pius X School of Liturgical Music. It's a fascinating read that inspires and explains one important force in the history of sacred music in the United States during the 20th century. And now, on to the interview. Thanks so much for joining me today, Frank.
Thank you for having me.
There are a number of really remarkable institutes that existed in the 20th century in the U.S. to educate students in sacred music, many of them inspired by Pius X's 1903 motu proprio Tra le Sollecitudini. Your own story, while remarkable and inspiring, is also a fruit of many efforts made on the part of Catholic institutions to educate young people in the Church's treasury of sacred music. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience growing up in Detroit and the formation you received in the Palestrina Institute of Ecclesiastical Music?
Well, good day, and thanks again one more time for having me. My boyhood wasn't really typical for someone growing up in Detroit in the 1940s. I was a washed-up boy soprano with only my piano to console me after the lights of a glorious performing career had faded away. When Mother saw a notice in the newspaper, Mother said, "Go play for these people." Off I went and met those wonderful mentors, Fathers Edward Majeski and Robert Ryan. They awarded me a scholarship to the Palestrina Institute of Ecclesiastical Music. So, entering 8th grade, I started a life of weekly journeys downtown on Saturdays to Sacred Heart Seminary for classes in chant, chironomy, choir, conducting, liturgy, theory, chant accompaniment, Latin pronunciation, history, the Liber, the Graduale, etc. Training was quite intense. By that first Christmas, I was ready to play for numerous masses at our parish, and I was launched as a full-fledged organist. About the time I started high school, I started accompanying ballet and became an intern in training with the organist at St. Bridget's. At 16, I bought a 10-year-old Chevrolet, became an organist choir director, and filled my after-school life with voice lessons, piano lessons, organ lessons, and ballet accompanying. As a student of the Palestrina Institute, we were privileged to participate in many important events, but two that stand out were the 250th anniversary of the city of Detroit, and the other was the 100th anniversary of the Immaculate Conception. Because my organ teacher, August Conan, was organist at the cathedral, I became his substitute. That was a great experience in an inspiring space. My junior year, my mother saw a notice in the newspaper about a scholarship test for children of Ford factory workers. Mother said, "Go take this test." The following Easter Sunday, between Masses, my father appeared at the church where I was playing with a telegram from Henry Ford Jr., stating I had been awarded a full scholarship to any college that would accept me.
Oh, wow.
4 years later, I had a Bachelor of Music degree from Eastman.
That's fantastic. And so where did you go from Eastman, and how did you end up as the chair of music at Manhattanville College?
Well, after Eastman, I just kept coming east.
Go east, young man.
Yes, that was it. Since I didn't have a six gun and a cowboy hat, I never could ride a horse. Off I came. In college, I met a colleague, and he introduced me to a piano pedagogue, a wonderful piano teacher. And after Eastman, I realized I had a degree in piano playing. I was a piano major, but I didn't know much about playing the piano. And so I decided I wanted to come east and study some more. So I came east to study with that teacher, but I got a master's degree at Manhattan School of Music, studying with another teacher first, and went into the Army, studied with that teacher, went back to the original, Jean Dansereau, and studied with him for about 10 or 12 years. I got a PhD, and during the course of those studies, while I was playing concerts, actually, I got a rave review concert I gave at Town Hall, and the professor, the chair of the music department at Manhattanville, saw the review, and when Martin Kanan left Manhattanville, he remembered my review and called me, and so in 1974, I started teaching at Manhattanville, and after many years there, became chair of the department. And that's a long story, but that's the short version.
That's great. So could you tell us a little bit about the origins of the Pius X School of Liturgical Music? which obviously later becomes the Manhattanville Music Department. And perhaps introduce us to the figures of Father Young, Mother Georgia Stevens, and someone our listeners know a little bit more about, Justine Ward. Why was the school founded, and what was its mission in its foundation?
Okay. The Pius X School was the brainchild of two brilliant women, Justine Ward and Georgia Stevens. Ward, heir to a large financial empire of William Baird Cutting and Olivia Peyton Murray, was born in 1879 and acquired some skill at the piano as a young woman. But her main musical training was acquired in private studies from 1895 to 1901 in composition, orchestration, harmony, counterpoint, and form, and during the final year, liturgical music, including Renaissance polyphony in New York with Hermann Hans Wetzler. Ward's genius lay in combining the pedagogical materials of Father Thomas Shields, professor at Catholic University, with those of Father John Young, conductor of the renowned St. Francis Xavier Choir in Manhattan. She was able to seamlessly wed those materials with the philosophy of one and the musical exercises of the other to Gregorian chant with her own ideas, and construct a workable step-by-step program. Much later, having witnessed Dom Maquereau, André Maquereau, foremost authority on Gregorian chant, rehearsing choirs at the 1920 International Congress, Ward decided that she needed to study with him and did so. Georgia Stevens, RSCJ, born in 1870, was also a woman of social standing. Her father, Henry James Stevens, was a direct descendant of John Stevens, who settled in Andover, Massachusetts in 1638. She was given violin lessons from age 7, attended the storied Hoch Conservatorium in Frankfurt am Main, where her teacher, Hugo Hermann, thought she was talented enough to pursue a performing career, and ultimately studied with Charles Martin Loeffler. She performed a lot and even contemplated a career in theater before converting and entering the convent at 36 years of age. She was assigned to Roehampton, England, where she honed her considerable teaching skills, becoming a master teacher. In 1916, Mother Georgia Stevens was asked by Mother Moran to improve the student teaching in chapel services. Stevens reached out to an acquaintance, Justine Ward. At the demonstration lesson, those assembled were so impressed that classes using the Ward method were begun at the Manhattanville Academy and in the Annunciation Grade School that September. At the time, Manhattanville also included the College of the Sacred Heart, for women only, where the first summer liturgical music session was held in 1917.
Wow. So I think it's important for people who might be familiar with Manhattanville College and they know, for example, that now it's in Westchester County, to realize, for example, at this time that it was in the Bronx, right?
Yeah, well, it was Upper Manhattan. I don't know if it was strictly speaking the Bronx. It was right at the border there.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a Manhattanville section of, I think it's still in New York City, Upper Manhattan.
Right. I think there's a branch of CUNY there now, isn't there?
Well, actually, City College took over the Manhattanville property, and there may still be a building there that was part of Manhattanville College.
I see. So we've talked on the podcast in a previous episode on the Ward method about the 1920 International Congress of Gregorian Chant held at St. Patrick's Cathedral in the city. That's where you mentioned that Mrs. Ward was interacting with Dom Maquereau.
Right.
Could you tell us about the impact of this Congress on the growth of the Pius X school, and perhaps what role Ward method training played in the school?
Sure. You asked about the 1920 International Congress, ran June 1st through 3rd at St. Patrick's Cathedral, but there was an event the day before which was also quite important. Fordham University held a pageant to celebrate the canonization of Jeanne d'Arc on May 30th. Pius X School was asked to supply young students to sing for the pageant and benediction. Selections of chants and hymns from the ward hymnal were taught to hundreds of New York parochial school children. Two important figures in the Pius X story, Dom André Maquereau and Dom Augustin Cottard, attended in anticipation of the next day and assured Justine Ward that the chant was in the Solemn tradition. The Benedictine abbot at Solemn was the acknowledged center for revival of interest in the study of Gregorian chant, as you know, and Dom Maquereau was the mastermind behind the monumental Paleographe Musicale. For the cathedral event, the ward method was used in the training of 3,500 school children, some having come from as far as Philadelphia and Albany to sing some of the chants of the Mass, while a men's choir from Philadelphia sang the chants of the Propers, Vespers, and Compline. The all-star cast included Dom Maquereau, Dom Cottard conducting, Joseph Bonnet at the great organ, and Becket Gibbs at the chancel organ supplying accompaniment. There were also lectures and exhibits, and the press was favorable. According to Mother Carroll, quote, "The promoters of the Congress felt that two things had been proved. One, the congregation could sing some of the chants. Two, the ward method facilitated the teaching of the Gregorian chant," close quote. The International Congress broadened the international scope and reputations of both the ward method and the Pius X school, with Mother Stevens as director. Important contacts were made. Father De Santi, president of the Pontifical Institute, wrote to Ward, quote, "You have given to America and to the whole world a bright example of what can be done for the decorum of the liturgical cult and in obedience to the will of the Church, and the fruits will doubtless be copious," close quote. In a letter to Mother Superior of Manhattanville, Ward praised Mother Stevens, quote, "whose admirable training of the children, whose tact and patience combined made the Congress a great success," quote. Mother Stevens was prohibited from attending because of the rule of cloister. Another quotation from Ward, "The two Benedictines were impressed and made their opinions known." At the end of the summer session, Ward wrote to Stevens, "I am so happy over the way everything is going, and I feel that you and not I are the indispensable part of the show. What good did my books do for the cause until you came into the field?"
Wow, that's really remarkable. And just to imagine being there with 3,500 kids singing the Mass Ordinary. And
That's right.
I mean, what just an incredible embodiment of what Pope Pius X was calling for. You know, it's like one thing to call for something in a document, but another thing to have it be met with enthusiasm and creativity and hard work to be able to come to life in real people.
Well, and the rapidity with which Ward and Stevens worked. If you think about Ward developing her materials and then being introduced to the college in 1916, and here we have this thing in 1920, and you have this outreach that goes to many parts of the country, and 3,500 children trained in this method already.
Yeah, that's remarkable.
It is most remarkable.
Yeah. Do you know, was the rapidity of the growth of the method sort of a result of like the just huge expansion in the number of parochial schools available or being built, and that they needed a music curriculum, or how was that connection made?
Well, I think what happened was the college was able to disseminate understanding that they were starting these summer sessions, and the people in the field, the teachers in the field, were hungry for materials, and they came, and the word method was there, and it was approachable, and it had, this program, what we would call today a program, and there it was, and off they went, rapid fire.
Wow. So also in our previous episode on the Ward method, we talked a little bit about how Mrs. Ward was sometimes a difficult colleague. Could you tell us a little bit about the falling out between Mrs. Ward and Mother Georgia Stevens, and where Mother went with her work after this?
Sure. The Ward-Stevens falling out was both tragic and fortuitous. Tragic because we can only speculate on what they might have accomplished together after such an auspicious beginning. Fortuitous for what they each went on to accomplish on their own. Ward went on to develop her program at Catholic University, her career as an author, and solidify her contacts at Solem and in Rome. Stevens developed an internationally renowned school of liturgical music instruction, which featured the most important Roman Catholic liturgists and musicians as faculty members and performers during its summer sessions, and sent outreach sessions to all parts of the United States. Given two strong, driven personalities, and the dissolution of their partnership was probably inevitable. But the story runs this way. Ward seemed restless as early as 1928, when she began to work with the director of Catholic University to create a school of liturgical music named after Dom Maccaro. This may have raised suspicions both here and in Rome. A month later, she initiated plans to create the Dom Maccaro Foundation, which would support the new schools at Catholic University and Manhattanville. This unity was short-lived, however. In January 1930, she wrote, quote, "Rupture with Catholic University decided," close quote. At about this time, relations with Mother Stevens and the Pius X school began to cool. The division of duties, Ward independent, moving about, promoting herself and the method, free to write and travel. Mother Stevens cloistered, doing the work of administration and teaching behind the scenes, may have contributed to the split. Earlier, they had had a disagreement over the handling of a problem at the school in Serravalle, Italy, and Ward sent a letter critical of Mother Stevens to Mother Duran, president of Manhattanville. Ward also expressed her thoughts on a reorganization of the Pius X school, including everything from its relationship with the college to finances, admissions, hiring and supervision, and her appointment to both the faculty and the board of trustees of the college. While spending much of her time in Europe, the ever-protective Ward received less detailed reports of the everyday operation and pedagogy of the Pius X school than her nature required. Upon receiving copies of Mother Stevens' pamphlet, Gregorian Chant, which Stevens had published for use in conjunction with the Ward method books, Ward fired off a telegram claiming copyright infringement and demanding that all copies of pamphlet must be destroyed and type dispersed. A detailed and rather condescending letter to Stevens followed shortly, outlining Ward's position and concerns regarding her property and the limitations of its use by others. The tone is set in statements such as, quote, "I am also quite sure that you are ignorant of the copyright laws," and "a teacher who would read this pamphlet of 8 pages and consider herself competent to introduce Gregorian chant into a school would simply be a very ignorant person and would pass on her ignorance to others," close quote. In 1930, Ward was in Sable, France. She was fearful that Stevens was not teaching her method precisely as she had dictated should be taught. There were some rather testy exchanges back and forth. One of the final responses from Stevens to Ward is worth noting, quote, "Where you refer to Pius X school as my school, we would be more than glad to represent your ideals and work, but I do not think that any school that is an integral part of any college or corporation could call the said school somebody else's school, no matter how great the help of the founder and benefactor may have been. I think the school would have to be called the Pius X School of the College of the Sacred Heart, but would be known to represent your theories now and in the future," close quote. Finally, the situation between Ward and the religious of the Sacred Heart reached a breaking point. Ward's resignation was accepted, with regret, by the Board of Music of the College of the Sacred Heart on June 19, 1931. Ward saw to it that some of her friends who had been benefactors of the school shifted their allegiance elsewhere, and that no monk of Salem would be allowed to teach at the school for almost 30 years. Even without Ward's money and context, Mother Stevens continued to improve the school's educational position of providing the best education in Catholic liturgical music available.
So Mother had a profound impact also on a sort of patriarch of sacred music in the United States, Theodore Maurier, or Ted Maurier, as many people know him. Could you tell us a little bit about their interaction?
I think Ted Maurier's own words best relate Mother Stevens' impact on him, as found in Father Scaris's article in Sacred Music. Quote, in the mid-30s, the Pius X School of Liturgical Music in New York conducted courses in Gregorian chant at the Sacred Heart Academy in Newton, Massachusetts. The faculty of the courses was headed by Mother Georgia Stevens. The courses included a study of Gregorian chant notation and the sung liturgy of the church. We listened to recordings of the chant made by the choir of the Abbey of Salem. The courses proved to be a mind-stretching experience, and one that has lasted throughout my life. Maurier went on to become choir master of the Gregorian chant Schola at St. Paul's in 1947, and in 1963 established the Boston Choir School, lectured at the Pius X School, and contributed to the Pius X Hymnal. Faculty advisor of doctoral program in liturgical music and director of the Center for Ward Studies at the Catholic University of America, and former president of the Church Music Association of America. He was featured on many programs and broadcasts at the Pius X for some 40 years, like, for example, in 1957 Catholic Hour radio broadcasts. I met Maurier in 1991 at Manhattanville College's sesquicentennial celebration, where Mother Morgan was honored. It was my privilege to be asked to perform on that program.
So both these summer sessions that you were referring to and the Pius X choir attracted a huge number of the world's best musicians during the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Could you tell us about some of the characters that passed through its halls or collaborated with the choir that interested you most when you were researching the history of the school?
Of course. I would love to have met Justine Ward, even though she was gone by then. And I think all the other directors of that era, Mother Georgia Stevens, Mother Eileen Coe-Holland, and Mother Josephine Morgan, whom I did meet, and Elizabeth McCormick, whom I also met, interviewed, and spent time with on more than one occasion. Of the other personalities, those I met included Mother Catherine Carroll, quite shy, Sister Mary T. Clark, brilliant but approachable, Peggy Leider, Ted Maurier, Ralph Hunter, Robert Hupka, a real character, and Gustav Rees, soft-spoken. But regretfully, I did not meet any of the movers and shakers from Salem. I also think C.J. McNaspy would have been a real hoot. There were so many that seemed like interesting people, but a selection would have to include Joseph Chelineau, Monsignor Martin Held Regal, Paul Creston, Gottfried Rieckmann, Reverend Frederick McManus, Alexander Peliquin, pianist Philippa Schuyler, Reverend Gerald Sloyan, composer Sister Theophane, Ronald B. Thomas, creator of the Manhattanville Project, composer Ethel Voynich, Reverend Rembert Weekland, composer C. Russell Woolen. It's really sad I never got to hear the choir performed in Town Hall.
So the development of the Pius X School is a really interesting lens through which to view the changes to the liturgy and music that took place in the 1960s. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the composition and hymnal projects that developed in the school as a response to the reforms called for by Sacrosanctum Concilium?
Sure. Well, strictly speaking, it did not fall within the purview of the Second Vatican Council. One cannot overlook the Pius X hymnal, which came out in May 1st, 1953, to coincide with the 50th anniversary of the Motu Proprio. The reason I bring it up is because it was in some ways a manifestation of the undercurrent of pre-consular activity taking place. It was the most important new collection of church musicians of its day, for church musicians, When it was introduced, Francis Cardinal Spellman, Archbishop of New York, wrote in the foreword, "The hymns, carefully selected and appropriately arranged, manifest a pattern perfectly liturgical and beautifully artistic. The material runs from tunes found in the Bunker collection of pre-Reformation and counter-Reformation German hymns to works by Flor Peters and C. Russell Woolen. However, it never really caught on with the folk. Perhaps the hymns were too sophisticated or too subtle, or maybe the cost of retooling all those parish pews was just beyond reach. In the area of composition, the school under Mother Morgan mounted two major gatherings of composers and liturgists, one in 1964 and the other in 1967. While from the outside, the Catholic Church seems like a giant monolith, immutable, moving very slowly, in fact, beneath the surface, much lively discourse takes place. Vatican II did not just spring up. One example, in 1940, the first Benedictine liturgical conference, named Liturgical Weeks, was held at St. John's Abbey of Collegeville, Minnesota. Susan Benofi tells us that liturgical weeks were attended by thousands of priests, religious, and laity interested in liturgical reforms. At later meetings, some liturgists decided that people's anticipation would be possible only if changes were made in the rites and began to advocate such changes. Thus, many of the practices associated with the new Mass after the Council actually had their beginnings decades later. Two Americans, Father McManus and Diekman, were on the preparatory commission before the Council and also were periti experts and were official advisors to the Council's bishop on historical and theological scholarship pertaining to the liturgy. Diekman lectured at Pius X in the summer of 1957, followed by other figures instrumental in implementing the changes in the liturgy, Rembert Weekland in 1958, Gerald Sloyan and Frederick McManus in 1963. Anticipating changes, Mother Morgan drafted Father Clement McNaspy to be her co-chair for a meeting of composers convened on February 8, 1964. She invited 31 leading musicians, composers, performers, and musicologists, Catholic liturgists, religious, and even a couple of published representatives to attend, including Monsignor Richard Curtin, Paul Creston, Alexander Peliquin, Sister Thea Fain, Frank Campbell Watson, and Paul Henry Lang. In 1967, Mother Morgan again went to her brothers, Zions of the Morgan Brothers Moving Company, and returned to announce the creation of a $20,000 Morgan Fund. These monies were to be used to promote new music for a new liturgy. The final list of participants in the Composers Forum numbered 36, and the program called for sessions on the liturgy, textual considerations, musical standards, vernacular settings of Latin texts, congregations, organ performance, and the future. Some of the speakers were Mother Morgan, Mother McCormick, Ted Marier, Robert Hofstadter, Paul Creston, Monsignor Richard Curtin, Reverend Clement McNaspy, Louise Talma, Mother Catherine Carroll, Reverend Joseph Ruff, Arthur Riley, and Eugene Fisher of the Fisher Publishing Company.
What has fascinated me in reading your series of articles that we've been publishing in Sacred Music now is that it's such an interesting portrait of this time, and you get a real sense of the sort of human lay of the land, so to speak. And, so many people have these questions about like what happened at Vatican II and what happened immediately after it. How did all the changes that were made end up being so? And I think what you've really offered in your careful history of the school is a really important snapshot into it. And it's even a great pairing to Monsignor Schuller's 7-part article, A Chronicle of the Reform, that was published long ago in Sacred Music.
Yes, that's a brilliant article. Yes.
It's a really helpful way of understanding how things happened. And so for that, I'm so grateful for your work because the personalities are so strong and the ideas are so vivid and you get such a better idea of how things happened. So all throughout its history, from the Pius X school into the music department of Manhattanville College, the school was a model for how, when taken seriously, the Church's treasury of sacred music can have a profoundly positive impact on hundreds of thousands of students and really engage the larger musical world through sacred music. What are you most proud of in the school's history and from your time at Manhattanville?
All right. Please excuse the chest thumping, but you asked the question. One event that stands out for me was in 2010-11, when at the request of President Molly Ezo Smith, I put together a special event featuring Gregorian chant. I was able to coax the nuns of Regina Laudis in Connecticut out of cloister to perform in Pius 10th Hall, and I gave the introductory lecture. They even stayed for a reception, and their superior, Mother Dolores of movie actors fame, was there to mingle as well. You may recall she kissed this rock singer. No. Oh no, I can't think of his name now.
The nameless Elvis Presley.
Elvis Presley, thank you. Okay, heartthrob, I knew that. Well, anyway, I secured a $10,000. Another thing happened. I was able to secure a $10,000 grant from the Reams Foundation for performance featuring choral works. So, again, following in this tradition, it has also pleased me with how a short piece I was asked to write for the website by the head librarian ultimately developed into a number of articles for your journal, Musica Sacra. These articles, I hope, will preserve the true, marvelous legacy of a great school of liturgical music. During my directorship, I was able to maintain the high standards of the department and an enrollment of about 90 full-time students. I was able to ensure that all 5 music major areas were brought into compliance with New York State education requirements. I put together a music business symposium with representatives from Steinway Piano Company, the recording engineer of Manhattan School of Music, professional music management, directors of an international piano competition, and others prominent in the field. And I put together the most inclusive Pius 10th alumni meeting in recent memory. So those are some things that I feel really pleased about.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to hear you recount not only your research into the history, but your time there. And I'm wondering if you could wrap up by just telling us what are some of the life lessons you've kept with you from the formation in sacred music that you received. I know so many of our listeners are interested in building structures to educate children and educate all Catholics in the Church's treasury of sacred music. And what we all have in mind is not just getting to heaven and being educated in such beauty, but also the idea that there are so many virtues and beautiful things to take away throughout one's whole life in a really great formation in sacred music. So what do you think comes out in your experience of that?
Well, I think the first thing that happened was I realized music should be taken seriously. At Palestrina Institute, we were treated as seminarians, really. Being an organist choir director was a vocation, a calling to be treasured. Music is not just entertainment or soothing background sound, a mood-inducing soporific, but an active part of the worship service. Should be rendered with utmost attention to detail of style, expression, and precision. My early training at Palestrina greatly informed my other performing and interest in musicology. I wrote music criticism for 14 years and often listened to choruses and various types of early music, much of it rooted in traditions which were traceable back to material I had been introduced to at the Palestrina Institute. My wife is a professional singer and was deeply involved in church music for many years, and that was another area where we connected and performed together professionally. Once out of Detroit, I began playing in churches of other denominations, and this ecumenical work broadened my perspective on humanity in general, which in turn helped my capacity as advisor to students of different backgrounds. Finally, I served as Manhattanville College organist beginning in the 1980s when Edgar Hillier left, and as a result spent many a serene hour in the chapel, early in the morning with sunlight streaming through the beautiful Rambusch stained glass windows, practicing on the lovely Moeller organ. That was both a privilege and a blessing.
That's really beautiful. Well, in our show notes page, we will point people to links where they can access articles that you've written about the Pius X school. We have yet to publish one article in that series, but everything else is now published with the most recent issue of Sacred Music Summer 2020. Or sorry, it was Spring 2020. Spring 2020 containing the most recent installment. So thank you so much for joining me today, Frank. It was really a privilege to hear you recount the history of an institution you love so much.
Thank you. It was my privilege.
And you can head over to our website, sacredmusicpodcast.com, click on episodes, and scroll down to Season 3, Episode 8. And click on that. There you'll find our show notes for this episode, where we'll place a couple of links, including a page where you can join the Church Music Association of America, and as a benefit, you receive a subscription to Sacred Music Journal. There are also available the archives with several of the articles that were mentioned today, including the one by Monsignor Schuler and a couple of the installments by Dr. Brancaleone, chronicling the history of the Pius X liturgical school. And until our next episode, may we sing the praise of his glory.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast with Peter Carter and Dr. Jennifer Donaldson. For more information about this episode, sacred music resources, or upcoming events, visit our website at sacredmusicpodcast.com. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcast app. If you enjoy our podcast, please write us a review on iTunes. This improves our iTunes ranking and helps others find out about the podcast. The music you heard at the beginning of this episode is Hec Dies by William Byrd, sung by the London Oratory Schola Cantorum Boys Choir, directed by Charles Cole, from the CD Sacred Treasures of England. The music at the conclusion of this podcast is the first movement of Trio Sonata No. 6 in G major by Johann Sebastian Bach, performed by Peter Carter. We look forward to having you join us next time, and until then, may we sing the praise of His glory.